Curious what attachment style you are? Watch today's video where I'll review the 4 attachment styles. My name is Diana Garcia. I'm a licensed therapist and a private practice owner of Nurturing Minds Counseling. If you're new around here, subscribe now to get more tips to nurture your mind, body, and soul. All right, let's jump into this week's video about attachment styles. Off with a little bit understanding of attachment theory and just overall attachment. So it's helpful to understand that we're all biologically wired to connect, and we're wired to connect pretty much because we need others to survive. So if you think about when a baby is born, they need a caretaker to make sure they stay alive long enough to be self-sufficient. So because of that, innately, we're all wired to connect. Now, when we think of attachment theory, it's really talking about the way we connect kind of those relationships, particularly those relationships with early childhood parental figures, whoever they are, really kind of set the blueprint for ongoing relationships. There's a lot of research that was done that really showed, they did this strange situation with Mary Ainsworth, really famous study where they had babies and their moms in the labs, and they'd studied them together, and then the whole point with the mom would leave and then the mom would come back to see what would happen to the baby. So how they would react when the mom came back. Did they eventually move towards the mom? Did they move away? Were they very clingy? Was there a lot of protest behaviors? And so based on this study, they really kind of noticed these different attachment styles that has continued to be replicated. So those are the 4 attachment styles that I'm going to go over today. Important before I go over the attachment styles is that any of the behaviors that may show up that isn't the most ideal or secure attachment style is okay. Meaning they were there for a reason. They were there to protect you at some point in your life. And so a lot of times we're going to go through the styles, and it's helpful to understand that regardless of what style you think you tend to gravitate towards, one, it's flexible and changeable, and you can do work to get to more of a secure attachment style. And 2, that it's not helpful to shame yourself, whatever style it is, because those behaviors were there for a reason at some point. Okay, so let's start with the first one, secure attachment. So this is really the one that when we think of a child who had secure, consistent love and nurturance and support from their primary caretakers, they're most likely to develop the secure attachment. Their parental figures are more likely to have a secure attachment, so they model that as well in relationships. So this is really when the individual can kind of alternate between understanding that relationships are healthy and safe and they can trust in relationships, as well as feel pretty confident on their own, right? So they have this healthy sense of self. It's kind of this healthy interdependence. It's not either too rigidly independent or not too kind of clinging to relationships. They're also someone that can really kind of set boundaries, communicate, know that what behaviors are okay for them or not in relationships. They're not afraid of conflict, so they're not conflict averse. They can engage in conflict resolution. And again, these are individuals that when they think of relationships, they see it as a healthy human need and they try to foster that, but in a healthy way for them, right? They're not going to kind of sacrifice their individual needs just to be in a relationship. Overall, when we think of attachment styles, this is the one that we're most likely to want to work towards because this is the one that's going to enable you to have more safe and secure connections. Second one I'm going to go over is more of the anxious, preoccupied attachment style. So this is really more when an individual has a lot of anxiety when it comes to relationships. And really the anxiety or the source of anxiety, it's kind of this underlying fear that their partner is going to leave. And because of that, that drives a lot of the behaviors, whether kind of really being hyper aware of any signs for rejection or conflict, right? This might look like at times a partner asking is everything okay? Are you okay? Are you mad at me? At times needing more reassurance because this anxiety is starting to show up, right? And even let's say if their partner leaves for some periods of time, so let's say a partner has a work trip, that anxiety of being apart might be really triggering. Maybe some of that mistrust starts to show up. There might also be a lack of security in themselves, so kind of some low self-esteem, difficulties at times setting boundaries or limits. It can also look like if this individual is really anxious, this might be the person who is bringing up concerns in in the relationship because of their way of wanting to make sure that everything's okay. This could have been developed from a parenting style where the parent was maybe more inconsistent in their love. So they showed love and support, but not consistently. So the individual didn't learn to internalize that others are going to always consistently be there for you. Style I'm going to go over is really more the avoidant and dismissive attachment style. This is typically when an individual really kind of fears intimacy, is more of like tends to avoid relationships, or will be in relationships but really keep people kind of at arm's length. They're not someone that's going to be an open book with their emotions. They might even at times feel like a little bit kind of cut off from their emotions. Other people might see them as more cold or aloof or emotionally distant. Doesn't mean they don't have emotions. They're just a little bit more disconnected from that. There's someone that might even say they don't need relationships. That's not really important to them, or they don't have a lot of emotional needs in the relationship. They might not be really expressing their emotions as much. They are someone that might be really fighting for their independence, and they are hyper independent in general. They're someone that has learned to rely on themselves and really prides themselves on that. And at times a relationship might feel like it's threatening their independence and might feel really suffocating for them. So they might be someone that's saying, like, pushing back and saying, I need more time for myself, or I can't really meet all your emotional needs to a partner. Typically, this is someone who they might have grown up with a parent who has either flat out rejected them, abandoned them, or just left them alone a lot. So this individual really just learned to rely on themselves, and that's what they feel a little bit more comfortable or safe in. It doesn't mean that they don't want a secure and stable attachment. It's just that they need more experience, like building more of that with someone else, because they've learned to really rely on themselves versus someone else. The fourth attachment style is the disorganized attachment style. So this is really when an individual will vacillate between the anxious preoccupied style and the avoidant dismissive style. So they tend to kind of go between both and like have traits of both at times. This is someone who desperately wants connection, but at the same time, relationships and others feel so unsafe and threatening. This is typically because they have a history of either trauma, abuse, or neglect from their primary caretaker. So they've internalized this kind of dysregulated system of, like, on one end, right, we're all wired for connection. We need connection from others. So if we need to survive, we need to go to our parental figure. So they're turning towards, but at the same time, if that individual at times was abusive or neglective, then they had to turn away. And so there's this kind of sense between approach or avoid. And at times that's where they get really stuck in relationships. This individual also might be more mistrusting of relationships, again, because they have a history of getting really hurt in relationships by their parental figures. This is someone that also might be a little bit more struggle with emotional regulation, so they might have a hard time coping with their feelings. They might have more intense feelings at times. Now, as I've gone through the 4 attachment styles, it's helpful for you to kind of just think through some of these different attachment styles. Think through that, again, this is very fluid. It can change over time. That also you might notice that maybe it's not as fixed for you, that you exhibit certain attachment styles with maybe one relationship, but it shifts with another. But based on where you are now, I encourage you to think about how you can work towards kind of having more of this secure attachment, and what are the secure attachment skills. Hit like to let me know that regardless of which attachment style, you're not going to shame yourself. All right, guys, I really hope that was helpful. And as always, I encourage you to continue nurturing your mind, body, and soul, whatever that looks like for you individually or in relationships. Thanks.